to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here, and I really hope that you've been enjoying the conversations that you've been listening to, and hopefully finding some tips, some next steps that you can take if you struggle with similar feelings of self-doubt, which obviously, as you're hearing, are fairly universal. This is something that we all go through from time to time. When I started this podcast, my goal was really to try to normalize the experience, to let everybody know that you are not alone, that there's a name for what you're feeling, and that there are steps that we can be taking to manage it more effectively. What I have found over the course of these conversations has been fascinating. I have had an absolutely powerful and different conversation with every single person who I have interviewed. I worried at one point that there may not be enough to talk about. How much is there to say about imposter syndrome? Are the stories going to start to get repetitive? That has absolutely not been the case. Everyone brings a fascinating new perspective to this conversation. I have learned something from every discussion that we've had. I hope you have too. I want to make a note that many of these recordings are being done during the social distancing that's happening with coronavirus. I am doing my best to protect the sound quality, but we are all in homes that have pets, kids, all kinds of background noise going on. For me, it's much more important to share with you a very natural conversation between two people than it is to share a perfectly polished recording. So I hope that you will bear with us if there are moments where the sound is not perfect. Really, my goal is to share stories, not to provide perfectly scripted, perfectly polished audio. So apologies for any imperfections that may be coming through in the recordings, but I'm hoping that you're getting the essence of the message regardless. So thank you again for being here. I wish you all the best and hope that you will consider sharing your own story one day. Thanks again. Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for being here today. I would love to start by asking you to briefly introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your own journey and where you are now.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's exciting. I have a little bit of a varied and long journey because I'm 60 years old. So I will summarize, and then you can see if there's anything in there that's of interest to discuss.
Perfect.
So I basically have done many different things, but that wasn't the original plan. I moved to Boston after college and ended up working in an ad agency because in those days, everybody started as a secretary. Women started as secretaries. It didn't matter, that I went to Cornell or anything else. I was a secretary. So I did that for a few years. And then I, at 26 years old, opened up a cake bakery in Newton, Massachusetts, because I loved cake decorating and had sort of done it as a child and ended up taking courses and teaching courses and then bringing cakes into the ad agency for different clients. Like I created a Friendly's restaurant, 3D, like kind of unusual things. And people kept saying, you should just open up a bakery. And I had sort of struggled, like clawed my way up to the level I was at, which I was happy with in the ad agency, but I felt it was a very male-dominated business. And I just decided that it would be a great time in my life to open a bakery. And I had no experience doing that. So that was a wild ride, to say the least. And I created this bakery and built it up to a really good business for 7 years. And then in that time, I had gotten married and I had my first child. And I decided that it was really important to me to be a stay-at-home mom. So I sold my bakery to two of my employees, and it's still there today. So they've been there well over 30 years, which is unbelievable to me. So then I was home raising what ended up to be 3 children for probably 16 years. And I did many, many volunteer projects, big things, little things, big things, to sort of like fill that entrepreneurial spirit. And then I was, in 2013, I was looking for a weight loss program. And if I go sideways, I can tell you that I was an overweight teenager. So that was very, very difficult at that time for me, as it would be for anyone. And so I had always sort of struggled with my weight, from that point forward. So there I was at 53 in menopause, once again, trying to find a weight loss program, for the 100th time. And luckily, I stumbled on a program. I had great success with it, and I decided to become a coach for that particular program because I really believed in it. And that's what I've been doing for 7 years. So I'm a certified health coach. I help people with, with their health, but for most people, the first step is to get to a healthy weight. I'm not talking about a bikini body. I'm just saying, to be a healthy weight. And so I've been able to grow a wonderful business doing that for 7 years. So that takes us up to today.
Wonderful. And given that your career has had so many twists and turns, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? Has it shown up at all as you've been on your journey?
I mean, absolutely, because I guess one of my philosophies is, which ties into this, I think, but I'm curious to hear what you think. But one of my real core philosophies is that opportunity is everywhere, always, and that most people are either too fearful to take it or don't recognize it. Do you know what I mean? So I've been lucky in my life to, when I see an opportunity, I jump on it. Right. So that imposter syndrome, I've always been fearful of what I was about to do, always. And really can't say that I completely had the upfront credentials to do the things that I've done. But I guess I had enough belief in myself that I would be able to learn it as I went along, so I think I certainly could have been exposed as a fraud any number of times, but, I just kept going, till I got where I needed to be.
And that is really the fascinating thing about imposter syndrome, is that so many of us feel this way, yet most of the people that I interact with anyway push through it. They don't let it stop them from taking advantage of opportunities, taking risks. It may take them a little bit longer. They may have some disruptive thoughts along the way and some painful experiences. But one of the hallmarks of imposter syndrome is that it affects high achievers so much more than anybody else. And it's really the high achievers that are always stepping outside of their comfort zones, always pushing themselves. So it is this very interesting dynamic.
Right. Right. And I also, in many things, but in my coaching, I coach clients, but I also support other coaches, and many of whom are women. And a lot of people enter into this process as like, well, I'm not a coach. I don't know what to do. And I always say, listen, I'm going to teach you and show you and train you, and I try to say to people, look, if you plucked me out of what I'm doing and brought me to your job, right? Mm-hmm. And said, go ahead, do my job. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it on day 1 or probably day 100. So I try to remind people that we're always learning how to do our jobs. Right? I mean, that's just a process, and you shouldn't feel like you can't do it just because you don't know it at the beginning.
Yes. And that's such a great point, because that's something that I have really internalized in my own experience with imposter syndrome, and one that I try to share with others is that idea of resourcefulness. And you mentioned that earlier too, of having the self-confidence that you can learn it. So it's not walking into any new situation with an expectation that we have all of the information that we need, that we have all of the expertise, but that we trust ourselves to know that there are resources available that we can access and that we can get there.
Right. And I think, women in general don't have a lot of faith in themselves. And as they move forward in their lives, what I see, again, I'm 60 now, right? So I've seen so many stages, not even just from a professional standpoint, right? Just from a personal standpoint, right? Of young women having children and raising those children and then trying to get back to work or managing a home. And I think very often as women get older, they sort of lose faith in themselves and give up on themselves. And they forget what you just described, which is, hey, step out, maybe you don't know how to, even if it's cook like a meal that you're not comfortable with. I mean, it could be anything, but really just for people to exercise that muscle of, I'm going to try something new. And if I do it, great, great. And if I don't do it so great, so I don't, I'll learn.
Yeah. And I think that brings in the whole element of perfectionism too, which I think is a big one for women. And like you're describing, even in a simple daily practice of making a meal or just the little things that we don't even really consciously tune into, where we have such high expectations for ourselves, and we often subconsciously conclude, well, if it's not going to be perfect, then I'm not going to do it.
Right. Or I agree with you, and they may do it anyway, and then be disappointed in themselves because it isn't perfect.
That's right. Then beat themselves up over it. Right. Exactly. And how, and this is obviously not a question that anybody has a perfect answer to, but how do you manage that? How do you manage that for yourself or for the clients that you work with, just getting them to a place where it's not so much pressure, where we can go a little bit more easily on ourselves?
Correct. Well, I mean, I think also, in terms of the clients that I work with who are trying to get to a healthy weight, and, it's a process. And I always say to them, it's weight loss that leads to lifestyle, right? So we try to get away from the sort of diet mentality where they are going to lose the weight with our program, but then we want to teach them how to continue it, right? So that fits into what you just said, where I had a client this week say, oh, I cheated, on Saturday, and this was why, and I said, she had a lot of social, personal family things going on that were very stressful. And I acknowledged it, right? I'm so sorry. That is very stressful. I said, but you didn't cheat anything. I call it veering off. That's what I call it. When people on my program make a different choice on that day, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I tried to explain to her that, exactly what you just said. You don't have to be perfect. I want people to follow the program because that's the shortest distance to what they want, right? But life is life. And so there's always going to be cases where they're going to be tempted to veer off, and, they're going to have to make that choice. And I never want people to look back and feel bad, because that nobody benefits from that. Right? I mean, that is not the fuel we need. So, I'm a fan of learn from the past, but move on,
You're right. And I've been reading the book, How Women Rise, which is, for anybody who's not familiar with it, it's a book by Sally Helgeson and Marshall Goldsmith, and it talks about the 12 habits that keep women from advancing their careers. And one of the key themes that comes up in that book is the idea of all or nothing thinking that we tend to adopt as women. Mm-hmm. And so we put so much pressure on ourselves, that perfectionism. And then when we inevitably don't live up to those standards that we set for ourselves, we throw up our arms and conclude, well, I'm just not good enough, right? Well, it's a failure. And there is very little in life that is all or nothing. Like you're describing, life is life. And there are going to be days when you make good choices. There are going to be days when you make choices that you regret, but we have to have a more nuanced look at how we're operating in our lives to prevent ourselves from being so self-critical.
Yes. And I really feel, again, because I have not only been around in the internet world, I've been around before that. And I really feel that the more information we have, the worse it is. And the more comparative reality is created, right? With social media and everything else. And I think that has also contributed to women not believing in themselves. And, everything you're talking about, they don't feel adequate. They have a lot of self-doubt. And I think part of it is this technology, which is supposed to be improving things. That I think it's, especially, I've raised 3 children and who are young adults now. And I think it's a really tough time to raise children. I think it's a tough time to be growing up. And, you'd almost love to say to ourselves, like, just turn it off, because you're never going to be as good as the best of Pinterest.
That's right.
Right? Your stuff is never going to be as good as that. And your life is probably never going to be the best of Instagram or Facebook, right? I mean, that's part of it, don't you think?
I completely agree with you. And nobody's posting the bad, the messy, the ordinary on Facebook. It's your carefully curated image that you're trying to portray to the rest of the world. And then everybody's looking at that and thinking, I don't measure up. I used to joke too about, I have some friends on Facebook that would every month or in regular increments take these really professional pictures of their children and post them on Facebook. And then I would sit there and think, oh, I haven't had a professional picture taken of my children in a year, and my son has a bruise on his head, and my other one has a chipped tooth, and how am I going to ever take professional pictures again? Mm-hmm. And it's just this madness that we go through because we are looking to these external sites and images that people have created of themselves and thinking, I'll never be that good.
Right. And I was going to say something on that line, as you were telling the story. So I just had, professional headshots done of myself. And the photographer did some different things. And I really respect this woman, and I really wanted to promote her. Right. So I put a post on Facebook with some of the pictures, saying, kudos to Donna, this photographer, and here's some of the new pictures she took. And so people were like, oh my God, they're so great, a zillion comments. And so then I went in and I had to edit. I felt I had to edit the post, and I said, P.S. I had professional hair and makeup done. I mean, I did, and I almost felt guilty for the fact that people thought the pictures were so great. So I had to let them know that it wasn't, I had a professional. Isn't that funny?
That is funny. And I think that's such another great point too, that as women, we are not as comfortable accepting a compliment. We feel we have to explain. We have to, justify, or we will say, oh, but, right? So that's what you're describing too is, well, yeah, maybe it's a great picture, but it was actually because I had my hair and makeup done, right? Or right. Great job on that presentation. Well, you didn't see the part where I stumbled. And so we really don't do an effective job of saying thank you either, right?
Right, because we don't feel worthy of whatever that compliment is. Yes. And that's a shame also. Exactly.
So I've been trying to sort of spread the message that thank you is a complete sentence, and that we should practice in little everyday interactions. If somebody says, I like your blouse, or great haircut, anything, that we simply say thank you and not feel the need to say, oh, well, this, that, and the other thing to try to downplay it. I also think what's interesting is I was reading something recently that was talking about the difference between how girls and boys are socialized and how boys grow up one-upping each other. And that is the dynamic that exists between them. So if you see young boys playing together, one might say, look at how great I am, look what I can do. And then the next boy will say, oh yeah, you think that's great, look at this. And they're always trying to outperform each other. Whereas when girls are growing up, that's not really a safe thing to do. We would not be accepting of the girl who thinks she's wonderful, who's always trying to outdo the other girl. She would be alienated from her peer group for doing that. So some of this is just, I think, conditioning and behaviors that we've adopted in order to protect our sense of belonging and community with each other.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I hadn't heard that, but that makes sense. And I think too, we have a lot of, like that whole superwoman syndromes may be the wrong word, but that philosophy, women in particular, right? You don't hear men saying, I do it all. I raise my kids. I cook the dinner. They go to work, and I'm sure they're very involved in their families, but then it's not put on them. And there's the whole phrase superwoman, right? Which makes us think that that's somebody that can do it all and do it all well. And then they have to work harder to prove themselves. And that's a challenge. And then I was fortunate to work when I worked and be home with my kids when I was home. But I hear of so many women that are working while they're raising their families, and they never feel enough, right? Mm-hmm. When they're home, they feel like they should be working, and when they're at work, they feel like they should be home. And that's so difficult.
You're so right. And it reminds me too of, I have 2 boys that are currently 5, and I have a 9-year-old who will be turning 10 next month. And when my older son was born, I remember thinking, I am going to get out of bed every day, take a shower. I'm not going to be that mom that sits around in sweatpants. I'm going to make sure that I make dinner. And that superwoman mentality that you're talking about, I just thought, I'm going to prove to, I don't know who, because nobody else was expecting that of me, right? That I can do this. And I ran myself ragged. I remember I didn't get any sleep. It was overwhelming. I was burnt out. It was just, I lost so much weight right after my older son was born that instead of going through the trend of worrying about losing pregnancy pounds, I actually dropped 2 clothes sizes from my pre-pregnancy weight because I was so stressed out. And then my younger son was born almost 5 years later. And I said, screw that, right? Like I ended up setting up a schedule with my husband. So he took one of the middle of the night feedings. I ended up, having my then almost 5-year-old help out with getting things and, being part of the process. And what a difference it made in terms of my own sense of relaxation or mental health, I guess, and my ability to take care of everything. So going back to the whole resourcefulness thing, I think we have this built-in pressure and this sense of I need to know everything, I need to do everything. I can't take help from others or it's going to be a sign of weakness.
Right. I agree with you. And I think that's a shame, because you can't do it all alone, nor do you have to do it all alone. And it's interesting to me the way you described it, because I think for many women, it's the reverse. They have the one baby and it is overwhelming. I mean, there's no question about it. It's the biggest change you'll probably ever make in your life from having no children to one child. But for many women, they kind of I was telling my son the other day, I said, I got in the groove, like I could do it. And it seemed like a lot, but I could do it. And then when I had my second child, I was like, oh my God, that was so easy. I only had one, so it's almost the reverse of what you're saying, where for some people, as they increase their family, they really can't do it because then they're really juggling, and so, kudos to you that you figured it out for the second one and right. And could make it better. And I don't know why, women feel they can't ask for help. When I was raising my kids, we had 2 amazing community groups here in my town. One was called Mother to Mother. So you know what that is. It's a group of mothers. But there were mothers and there were nighttime things for mothers. There were daytime activities for kids. There were resources. And then we had, which I think is phenomenal, we had a babysitting co-op. So we all watch each other's kids, and it was a point system, so we had those kinds of things in place, and I don't have family near where I live. I don't know if I could have done it without that,
Yeah, that's so great. And I do think there's so much support available to us if we're willing to accept it and to not beat ourselves up over it, accepting it. That to not see it as some type of deficiency or weakness, right, but the reality of living in a complex world where we really don't operate in a vacuum. We have every right to lean on other people, whether it's for support in our personal lives or at work where we're, not necessarily experts and want to ask questions of other people, we really have to cut ourselves some slack.
Right. And I think I try to impress upon people, friends and clients and other women, that I want to support in what they do, is just that we get a lot of confidence and feel good from helping others, right? So now if someone asked your help for something, you would be all over it because that would make you feel good, right? So I try to tell people, look, asking for help, you're giving someone else the chance to help you. You're actually helping that person, right? Because don't we all want to be, when one of my friends has an issue, we're like knocking each other out of the way to help that person. Oh, I'll bring dinner. No, I'll bring dinner. Well, I'll bring lunch. Well, I'll do the food shopping. That's the community we've created, right? So we really, as women in particular, we really want to be helpers, right? So if you can have people flip the philosophy and say, when you need help, you're giving someone else the chance to help you.
I love that. I think that's such a great way to frame it and a way to make it more acceptable to ourselves to ask for that kind of help. I'm curious because you have 2 daughters. Do you see any differences in them from your own experience, or what do you think there's any generational aspect to what we're talking about?
I really do. And so I have 3 children, and there is like 8 3/4 year difference from my oldest daughter to my youngest. So that's a huge gap. And I have a boy in between, so I even see a big difference between the 2 daughters, never mind from when I was growing up. You know what I mean? Like I even see a difference there in 8 years. Again, not to, it sounds like I'm sort of complaining about technology, but where my older daughter is 27, she didn't get the phone. If she swears she was the last person on earth to get a phone, but she didn't really have the phone. I don't think until she was going into high school, right? Which is so old now. You see kids in 3rd grade with phones, right? Where my younger daughter obviously had it earlier. And I think that my older daughter is not as concerned about what other people think of her. And again, can I totally connect it to social media? And, maybe not, but I see a difference there. She's just a lot more confident in her views and her thoughts. Right. And the younger one grew up in the comparative reality. So I do think that, and I feel like I will sometimes say, when I was growing up or in high school, let's just say, if a bunch of people were doing something and you didn't get invited, you really didn't know about it. I mean, unless you happen to be walking by them talking about their plans, right?
Yeah.
And in those days, plans were made once. You didn't keep changing plans because we didn't have phones, right? You made a plan to go to the movies 4 days from now at 10 o'clock. You were at the movies.
Right.
There was no way to contact the person. So, you know what I mean? But now, they all see what everyone else is doing, and it's so hurtful. And that leads to big feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt.
You're so right. And as my boys get older, and they're not at that stage yet, I am really thinking about what role as a parent to play in that dynamic, because you don't want to remove them from that environment. That's where the social connection comes in, and they, I think, would suffer in different ways if they didn't have any way of connecting. But how do you manage that in a way that protects their self-esteem, and especially as they're going through such turbulent teenage times anyway?
Yeah, when you figure that out, that could be all you need to do. I'm just kidding. No, I think it is. I think it is a struggle, and the one difference I see between the raising of girls versus the boy, and again, this is just my experience, right? And every child is individual, so I am absolutely generalizing. I recognize that I am, but. That being said, I think that boys, or at least the boy I have in general, is so much less concerned about the friends and what they think and what they say. Like, honestly, he's like, whatever, and the girls hang on everything every friend does and says, because what does that mean to them? And how does that factor into the group? And there's just so much more. And, it's harder. It's harder to be part of it as a parent. It's harder to watch it. So yeah, I think that there are a lot of challenges, and I think, and even when situations arise and I'm discussing it with my husband, and he's empathetic and, he's great, but he doesn't quite get it. Because, he grew up as a male and there's just different dynamics.
Yeah, I think you're right. The situation has changed, but the male-female patterns are pretty similar to the way they've always been. So it is unfortunate for girls growing up in this time where they really can't escape that comparison and that just being surrounded by the social media and all of the messages that are being bombarded at them. I wish I had an answer. I really do. But I think it's an important conversation for us to continue to have.
Right. And so I think, I always try to move things to the positive. On the positive, what we can do for ourselves and our daughters and our friends, is to try to bolster people up by making them realize that they are enough. What do they have to contribute? What are their superpowers? All those things, right? Because that's the only way to combat this is to, give people the tools to use to improve their confidence and to encourage them to try things. Do you know what I mean? Like, encourage them to try things. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. And we can do that. And by doing that, they have the confidence. And I very often will say to all three of my children, that's so great that you did that. Can you believe you did that? Look at that. That is amazing that you were able to do that. Right? Because if you say that enough, right, their self-talk will be like, yeah, you know what? I did try that. And I did do that. And I did try that. And I could try that. So, and that's to me the way to flip it.
I think that's such a great point. And I think it ties into that whole conversation around growth mindset and the idea that we are not born with our capabilities fixed, right? That we can grow and develop and stretch in new directions. So instead of saying things like, I'm bad at math, right? And just having a fixed mindset around that, being open to the possibility that there are new ways of learning it, that we can grow in that direction if we choose to do so. And I think really encouraging children to, like you said, just try things is a great way to boost their confidence, because one of the things that I see in women, and I would say is true for myself too, is this desire to want to take an academic approach to everything. So when I don't know something or I don't feel strong in a certain area, my approach is to generally say, okay, what's the definitive textbook that I can read, right? What's the course that I can take that's going to teach me everything I need to know about this? But when it comes to this whole idea of building confidence and resilience and all of these other areas that we really need for our own personal and professional development, it's often just taking action that's going to allow us to get there. It's not going to be through reading a book. It's not going to be through taking a course. So having the courage to try something new, regardless of what the outcome is what's going to get us to that greater place of confidence and less self-doubt.
Absolutely correct. And some of it is experience. So for some of it, you really have to be patient, right? Some of it is just life experience.
Right.
So I agree with you. You can't learn everything from a course or a book. I totally agree with you there. And I totally agree with stepping in and taking action. I totally agree with you there. And I think then it's saying, you know what? You need to do that a few times. You need to try that a few times. You need to figure something out. You know what I mean? Because some of it is just the experience of what you want to do and doing it more than once. My my older daughter had created this musical theater camp that she used to run when she was in high school, and she'd run it for the girls my younger daughter's age, right? So when the older one was like 14, she had like a whole crowd of 6-year-olds that she would do this for, which was my younger daughter's age. And this progressed on, and she really made something of it. And it was a great little, little entrepreneurial thing she did, right? And so now the younger one has been doing it. It's very funny, honestly, kind of funny to look at it that way. But my point is, the first time my younger one did it, she had to find the girls. There was no little sister. She was the little you know what I'm saying? And she's been doing this for years now. And she actually, unfortunately, her college just is going online now because of what's going on here. So she's coming home and she's like, oh my God, I can do these camps now. I'm just saying, so she really had to do it a bunch of times to get the hang of it. So if she had only done it once and said, oh, I'm not that good at it, or I don't even know if the girls had fun, or I didn't earn enough money, whatever it is, that would have been terrible, right? But she had the experience of it. So the next time it was a little tweaked and a little bit better, and the next time, and and then she got all these repeat girls, and that made her feel great. And they, so do you know what I mean? So some of it is just the experience of it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point too, as we think about this tendency to compare ourselves to others, because one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast was to have a more open, vulnerable conversation around our inner thoughts and the struggles that we face as we strive to achieve our goals, whatever they may be for any particular individual. And I think that we as individuals have a tendency to look around and think everyone else has it all together. They're making it look effortless. What's wrong with me? And so, like you said, maybe your 6-year-old daughter at the time had no idea what went into the success that your 14-year-old daughter had. And if she had given up prematurely, she may have always gone through life thinking my sister is better, stronger than I am. In actuality, we don't see what goes on behind the scenes in all of the people around us. We have no idea what someone else's inner critic is telling them, how many times they failed before they got to where they are. And so we really have to trust ourselves, be willing to try it more than once, like you said, if it's something that we care about and want to invest in, and not make assumptions about what other people have gone through to get to where they are.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think that part of this is that women don't always like to be transparent about the struggle they're having. Mm-hmm. So, right? Mm-hmm. So like you said, everything looks great. So we don't know, we don't know what's going on really, right? Because we're all trying to portray this great outer image of our lives and what we are. Part of it's the social media, and part of it is just, wanting people to think it's all great, So like I find like I'm not great at any sort of exercise. But I force myself. So when I go to the gym and people are like, oh my God, do you love that class? I always say like, I hate all of it, but I'm just doing it, or I'll say, my God, I could never sit in the front of the spin class. I could never, have somebody watching me because I can't do it. And I find people like really love to bolster you up when you are able to be open about what your non-strengths are. So that would be another thing, if we were trying to fix everything, would be to sort of encourage women to be vulnerable and admit when things aren't so great.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we get so much support from others when we do that. And we also give permission to the people around us to be similarly vulnerable, to not feel like they have to be 100% perfect 100% of the time.
And I think that would really help. I think that would help people not feel that they had to be perfect and not feel badly when things don't go well, right? At some point you have to just let it go and be like, well, my dinner didn't come out that great, or my kid's Halloween costume isn't as good as the other kids, or I drove to the Cape and this one flew to the Bahamas. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, this has been such a great conversation, and it's really helped me too as a parent to be thinking about it from this angle. In sort of wrapping up here, what motivated you to want to be here today? What are you hoping people will take away from this conversation?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Well, I absolutely have enjoyed, I've been podcast guest a lot lately, and I get so much out of every single experience. So I guess part of it was selfish that I wanted to meet you and see what you were about, because I find that fuels me. But what I would like people to get from this is that you are the absolute designer and creator of your own life, and you're in it, and nobody else is walking in your shoes but you, and like, you do you, and don't get caught up in the self-doubt and the sort of feeling inadequate, because look in the mirror and see what you have done. I say this to my clients all the time. I say, think of all the hard things you've done in your life. Every day can be hard. You've got this. So I guess it would just be to try to encourage people to really just create what they want for themselves and not be looking over their shoulder as much.
I love that. Thank you so much, Amy. This has been such a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to staying connected.
Yes, I hope so too.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it with other women who can benefit from this conversation. Before we go, I want to share some additional resources with you. If you struggle with imposter syndrome and you want to manage it more effectively, I invite you to join my free Impostor Syndrome online challenge. Every day for 7 days, you'll get an email with self-reflection questions and exercises to help you better understand your own experience with imposter syndrome and how to navigate it more effectively. To join the free challenge, visit executivecareersuccess.com/imposter-syndrome-challenge. When you sign up, you'll immediately receive your first message. Also, if you're interested in joining a community of women who engage in candid conversations that generally aren't happening elsewhere, I invite you to join my Leading Women discussion group. On the first and third Thursday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern, we meet virtually over Zoom to talk about questions or challenges related to career management, leadership development, and any other relevant topics such as imposter syndrome and confidence. It's always a great discussion with a great group of women. If you want to check it out, you're welcome to be my guest on a future call. Just reach out to me at kim@executivecareersuccess.com, and I will share the call details with you. And if you want to join my newsletter to receive tips, insights, and updates, text Leading Women, all one word, to 66866. Finally, consider telling us your story. Contact me to learn more about how you can be a guest on the Imposter Syndrome Files. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.